Okay, most people who are thinking about downsizing have already been thinking about it for 2, 3 years already. You've probably toured a condo or two, you've done the math, likely, you know the house isn't fully used, and yet you still haven't moved. And it's not the stuff that's stopping you, it's not the market, it's not even the money. It's something nobody in real estate is going to say out loud to you because it's not really a real estate problem. It's an identity problem. And if you don't name it, you'll keep circling this decision for another 3 years and not understand fully why you're doing this. So by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what's actually happening and what helps people move through it. There's actually 4 things. Here's what's actually happening. Your home, if you've lived in it, let's say 20 plus years, isn't just a building. It's a physical record of your life. It represents where your kids grew up. It also represents a certain level of success, a sense of achievement, or the back garden where your kids played, or the bedroom your parents stayed in when they visited, the corner of the basement where your hobby has lived for maybe the past decade. And when you walk through your home trying to figure out what to keep and what to let go of, you're not just sorting objects. You're actually sorting memories. You're deciding what version of your life gets to come forward and what version gets left behind. And that is an enormous thing to ask of yourself. Decision fatigue, absolutely. And it makes it harder because nobody says it out loud. The whole process tends to get framed as a logistical problem when actually it's an emotional one. And if you don't acknowledge the emotional layer, you just keep spinning on the practical one and nothing actually moves. So I can tell you this from my own experience because we downsized ourselves. In our crawl space at our old house, I had 2 things I held on to for years: a set of chairs and a box of crystal glasses that had belonged to my mom. And the chairs, I loved them. Were they practical, particularly nice? Not honestly, not always. And I always told myself I'd refinish them one day. But that wasn't really why I kept them. They had been actually my grandmother's. And every time I looked at them, I was back in her house. They were a connection to her. And the crystal glasses were my mom's. And she'd asked me to keep them, and I did. And I remembered exactly how they'd come out for special occasions, the way she'd bring them out carefully, and the way the table looked when they were set. Keeping them felt like keeping a piece of her. But here's what I had to admit to myself when we finally moved. Those chairs in the crawl space and the glasses in the box, nobody was seeing them. Nobody was enjoying them. And sitting in the dark wasn't honoring either of those women. It was just a positioning and postponing a decision I hadn't been ready to make. Naming that was what finally made it possible to move through it. The identity pieces need to be looked at. So underneath all of this, that almost never gets talked about, and it's about identity, not just memory. For a lot of people, the family home is bound up in a very deep sense of who they are. It's where they raised their children. It's where they built the life they built. It's where people gathered for celebrations and holidays. In a quiet, unspoken way, being the person who owns the house, who maintains it, who has room for everyone, who holds the family together in that space, is part of how you see yourself. So when downsizing comes up, it can trigger something that's hard to name, a feeling of loss that goes beyond the house itself. Not just loss of the home, but the version of yourself that went with it. The parent who had the big Christmas, the couple who hosted summer dinners, or the person who always had room for a grandchild to stay. You know, I've seen people who were entirely ready to downsize financially, practically, logistically, stall for years because of this. Not because of anything was wrong with the plan, simply because nobody helped them think through the identity shift that was quietly woven into the housing decision. That shift is real. It's not irrational, and it deserves to be taken seriously, not talked about or rushed through. You know, the guilt around letting things go. Let's talk about the stuff for a minute after all, because while it's not the core issue, it's often where the emotional weight lands in most concrete way. Most people who've lived in a home for decades have things that belong to somebody who's no longer alive. A parent's furniture, your grandparents' china, the set of tools that came from your dad who used them for years. These items carry enormous meaning, not because of what they are, but because of who they came from and what they represent. The question that really hangs over them is, if I let them go, I'm letting the person go and I'm forgetting them. Is there something disloyal about donating the table my mother bought in 1974 or the bookcase that sat in my father's study for 40 years? When you sit with it, the answer is no. The memory of the person isn't stored in the object. The person you loved lives in you, not in the furniture, but it doesn't feel that way in the moment. And trying to push through that feeling without acknowledging it is exactly where people get stuck, sometimes for years. So I want to share something about my husband's stepmom because it captures this perfectly. She has a motorboat, and every fall it goes into dry dock, and every spring it gets delivered back to the dock, and every summer it sits there unused. She doesn't ever take it out. Her daughter doesn't take it out. It hasn't actually been used in 4 years. But when I ask her about it, when I ask whether it brings her joy, she says yes, without hesitation. And it's because she looks out at that boat, she sees her late husband. That was his boat. That was something they shared. The boat is how she stays connected to him. And letting it go feels like letting him go. Like she'd be saying that chapter of her life is over. And that's really gone. That she's moved on in a way that she's not ready to move from. So the boat stays, and she pays for dry dock every winter and delivery every spring for something that sits at the dock all summer. Is that irrational? I really don't think so. I think it's one of the most human things I've ever seen. The cost isn't really about the boat. It's about what she's not ready to say yet. What actually helps then? So, what do you actually do with all of this? Well, because knowing it's an emotional process doesn't automatically make it easier. The first thing that helps is slowing down and naming what's happening. If you find yourself dreading a decluttering session or avoiding it entirely, ask yourself what you're actually dreading. 9 times out of 10, it's not sorting, it's the decision about something that carries real meaning. And when you name it, you can work with that. And when you can't, you just keep avoiding the whole room. The second thing is giving yourself genuine permission to go in stages. You don't have to resolve the whole house in a weekend. In fact, trying to do it that way is one of the most reliable ways to burn out, shut down, and stall for another 6 or 8 months. The professionals who do this for work for a living, like senior move managers, estate clearing specialists, downsizing consultants, all say the same thing. Pace matters more than speed. Here's the third thing, is acknowledging that nothing ever has to leave immediately. Some things can come with you to the new home while you figure out how you feel about them. Some things can go to the family members who genuinely want them. And that handoff, done in person with a conversation attached, can feel very different from just donating something. And some things can be photographed and documented before they leave, which is a way of keeping the story, even the object itself, while the object itself is actually gone. And here's the fourth thing. The one most people skip is talking about it with a family member, a friend, somebody you trust. The process of leaving a long-held home is one of the more significant transitions in a person's life, and it deserves to be treated that way, not just as a logistics project to get done efficiently, but as something worth actually moving through. So let's talk about the other side of the bridge. Here's the frame that I think is missing from most downsizing conversations. Most people approach it as a process of loss. What am I giving up? What's going away? What version of my life am I leaving behind? But there's another way to hold it. The question isn't just, what am I letting go of? It's, what am I making room for? Less maintenance, fewer unused rooms, more time, more financial flexibility, a home that's sized for the life you're actually living now, not the life you were living 25 years ago when the kids were home and the house was full. That shift in perspective doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen on anyone else's timeline, and it can't be rushed. But it does happen. And most of the people I work with, once they're through the other side of it, feel something they genuinely didn't expect to feel: relief. Not because the home wasn't worth loving, it was, and it still is, but because there's no longer managing a space that's too large for their life. They're living something that actually fits where they are right now. And that turns out to matter more than most people expect until they're in it. So I'll see you in the next video.